Introduction for integration of plant organs for growth. Plants are vital to all life on Earth. Like other multicellular organisms, plant grows through a combination of cell growth and cell division called mitosis. Plants are made up of many cells. Group of similar cells work together in a tissue. Tissues work together in organs. And plants are made up of organs including roots, leaves, the stem, and reproductive organs. Plants need sunlight, optimal temperature, air, water, and nutrients in order to survive and grow. Each plant organ has its own function. The leaves absorb sunlight and make food for the plant by photosynthesis. The waste product of photosynthesis, such as oxygen, escapes through tiny holes in the leaves. The stem supports the leaves and flowers. It also transports waters and nutrients between the roots and the leaves. The roots keep a plant in the ground. They also take in water and nutrients from the soil. Then the reproductive organs allow a plant to produce new plants. Plants have two very different things in reproduction. They can have sexual and asexual reproduction. So the integration of plant organs allows a plant to survive and grow.
Pollination is the process through which flowers reproduce to fruits and crops. It is the transfer of pollen from anther to the stigma with the help of the wind and our pollinators. One of the examples of our pollinators are the bees. When the bee sits on a flower for sipping nectar, the pollen gets stuck on its body, and when it flies to another flower for more nectar, the pollen from the bee's body gets deposited on the female reproductive organ. And this process is what we call cross-pollination. But if the pollen from the anther is deposited on the stigma of the same flower or another flower on the same plant through wind and water, this is what we call self-pollination. Those pollinated by insects, birds, and animals are more likely to contain fragrance or nectar that make them brightly colored flower that attracts the pollinators, while those pollinated by wind often lack showy floral parts and nectar because they don't need to attract pollinators. In the reproductive structure of seed plants, we have two groups, the gymnosperms and angiosperms. When we say gymnosperms, it is non-flowering plants that have innate seeds. The reproductive structure of these plants are strugalous or cones. They produce two types of cones. The male cone that produces cone and the larger female cone is the seed. The seed development of this is initiated by fertilization, the union of haploid male nucleus from the pollen grain with the haploid female nucleus within the ovum to develop a seed. On the other hand, the angiosperms is a flowering plant that have to undergo a process called pollination before they can reproduce. In contrast, the difference between angiosperms and gymnosperms is how their seeds are developed. The angiosperm seed develop in the ovaries of flowers, while the gymnosperm seeds are usually formed in unisexual cones, and these plants are that of fruits and flowers. But both of them can be dispersed through wind or with the help of animals. Fruit consists of fertilized, mature ovules or seeds, plus the ovary wall, which may be fleshy or dry and hard. In some fruits, the seeds are enclosed within the ovary. The only part of the fruit that contains genes from both the male and female flowers are the seeds. The rest of the fruit arises from the maternal plant and is genetically identical to it. Fruits can be also classified as simple, aggregate, and multiple. When we say simple fruits, it is developed from a single ovary. They include fleshy fruits such as cherries and peaches. Squash, cucumbers, and eggplants are also developed from a single ovary and are classified botanically as fruits. An aggregate fruit develops from a single flower with many ovaries, such as with strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries. The flower is a simple flower with one corolla, one calyx, and one stem. But it has many pistils or ovaries. Each ovary is fertilized separately. Some ovules are not pollinated successfully, the fruit will be mishapen. And the last type of fruit are the multiple fruits. The multiple fruits are derived from a type cluster of separate, independent flowers borne on a single structure. Each flower has its own calyx and corolla. Pineapples and figs are examples of multiple.
The integration of roots, stem, and leaves is that these roots are responsible for absorbing water molecules and minerals from the soil. The stem, a linear structure, transport water molecules from the root to the leaves, and the leaves, as a solar panel, are responsible for photosynthesis to help the plant structure get more energy from the sun or metabolism and become healthy. Roots, stem, and leaves all work together as a team for their development, survival, and continued existence.
The collaborative absorption process starts when the cell wall of root hairs absorbs water molecules from the soil. Water absorption is mainly carried out by root hairs, which increase the area of water absorption. The xylem transports water and soluble mineral nutrients from the roots to other parts of the plants. Water and sucrose, which is the principal translocatable sugar in plants, travels through translocation, which is a long-distance transport that occurs in channel tissues in stems called xylem and phloem. With the aid of sunlight, processes of transpiration and photosynthesis are then carried out by plants. About 95% of the water absorbed is lost through the stomata present in the leaves. Stomata acts as a main site for gaseous exchange in plants. Through leaves, energy from sunlight is then absorbed and is used in producing the byproducts of photosynthesis. Oxygen will be diffused through leaves and glucose are either transported to the source or used by the plants. Glucose formed during photosynthesis is transported to the other parts of the body for the benefit of the plant.
Perpetuation of plant species. When we say perpetuation, it comes from the word perpetuate, which means for something to continue or for something to reproduce to continue. Propagation, the controlled perpetuation of plants, is the most basic of horticultural practices. Its two objectives are to achieve an increase in number and to preserve essential characteristics of the plant. It can be achieved sexually by seed or asexually by utilizing specialized vegetative structures of plants or by employing such techniques as cutting, layering, grafting, budding, and tissue culture.
The second type of reproduction is sexual reproduction, which means it involves gametes or sex cells. All plants that produce seeds have a life cycle that is alternating, which means they are heteromorphic generation. And these two alternating generation are called gametophyte generation and sporophyte generation. In sporophyte generation, this type of generation produces spores in its offspring, which means that this type of generation doesn't use any gametes. The spores that it produces are a tiny-like structure that a new plant can grow into with the help of germination. And this type of generation produces a diploid plant, has two sets of chromosomes, and reproduce asexually, which means sporophyte generations are plants that reproduce asexually. The second type of generation is the gametophyte generation. From its name, it means that they reproduce using gametes or using sex cells, and they form seeds to reproduce, of course, and they are haploid producing plants, and they reproduce sexually and only has a single set of chromosomes.
The definition. Survival is a natural process resulting in the evolution of organisms best adapted to the environment. Every organism has a unique ecosystem within which it lives. The ecosystem is its natural habitat. This is where the basic needs of the organism to survive are met. Food, water, shelter from the weather, and place to breed its young. All organisms need to adapt to the habitat to be able to survive. This means adapting to be able to survive the climate condition of the ecosystem, predators, and other species that compete for the same food and space. An adaptation is a modification or change in the organism's body or behavior that helps to survive. The importance. Plants need to disperse their seeds or fruit to ensure the survival of their species, not to be extinct. Various types of human activities such as illegal loggings and land clearing for agriculture and urbanization may destroy the habitat of plants and animals. The destruction of habitat causes plant species not to be able to continue their survival. Eventually, this will lead to extinction of plant and animal species. If certain species of animal or plants become extinct, other living things may suffer due to shortage of food and shelter.
How do plants survive? Like all organisms, plants compete with one another for what they need to survive and grow, like sunlight, water, and nutrients. Each plant has its own strategy for winning its battle with other plants. Plants and even other organisms also use different mechanisms to survive. Adaptation. Plants adapt themselves in order to survive in their habitat. The ability of living organisms to adjust themselves to the ecological environment is called adaptation. Plants make some natural adjustments, such as changes in their body or behavior or changes in location to fit themselves into their environment. Plants adapt to their environment from necessity. Plants may also adapt by growing lower and closer to the ground to shield themselves from wind and cold. Desert plants also have its own different adaptation to its environment to conserve food, energy, and water and still be able to reproduce effectively. Theory of adaptation. The theory of adaptation was proposed by Charles Darwin, which states that an organism that is able to adapt to the changing environment will survive. The rest will be eliminated. This is known as the survival of the fittest. In evolutionary theory, adaptation is the biological mechanism by which organisms adjust to the new environments or to the changes in their current environment. Although scientists discussed adaptation prior to the 1800s, it was not until then that Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace developed the theory of natural selection. Natural selection in plants. While natural selection tends to occur much more slowly in plants than animals, it does definitely happen. Natural selection is the process through which populations of living organisms adapt and change. Individuals in a population are naturally variable, meaning that they are all different in some ways. This variation means that some individuals have traits better suited to the environment than others. Individuals with adaptive traits that give them some advantage, are more likely to survive and reproduce. These individuals then pass the adaptive traits to their offspring. Over time, these advantageous traits become more common in the population. Through this process of natural selection, favorable traits are transmitted through generations.
Most species of water lilies have rounded, variously notched, waxy-coated leaves on long stalks that contain many air spaces and float in quiet freshwater habitats. The stalks arise from thick, fleshy, underwater stems that are buried in the mud. The fragrant flowers are borne at or above the water surface on long stalks. Water lilies have a number of adaptations that help them survive in water, including big leaves that float on the water surface to attract ample sunlight for photosynthesis. The top side of the leaf is covered with a cuticle to keep it as dry as possible, and the underside has thorns to protect against predators. These thorns on the bottoms of the leaves helps to protect it from fish that might consider it a food source. The thorns also help support the leaves. Likewise, the rings of the leaves of the lily protect it from becoming food for birds and insects. The leaves themselves are wide and flat to keep the lily afloat by distributing the weight. Before adaptation, the short-leaf flower helps to increase its pollination chances. The flower, which only blooms at night, lets off a unique butterscotch and pineapple scent to attract pollinators, and it actually traps those pollinators inside the flower to give them all the pollen at one time. Once pollinated, the white flower turns pink. Water lilies take advantage of the support water offers around it, and the fact that aquatic environments often have far less compillion for essential minerals and resources than forests and grasslands. When they float, the waterlines usually have access to light, which is unshadowed by taller plant species. Whereas on land, small plant species often get overshadowed by taller ones, resulting them to not being able to receive as much light. Weak stems are an adaptation which allow water lilies to focus their energy and resources on expanding their leaf network rather than continually strengthening a stem. This is because the water in which water lilies float provides them all support traditionally offered by stems. Water lilies stomata are tiny openings in the epidemic of a plant. They allow gases and water vapor pass. The stomata of the waterflies are placed at the upper surfaces of their leaves, maximizing their air exposure, instead of throughout the surface of the leaves where water contact could prevent the flow of these gases. These leaves of water lilies lay flat on the water surface. This helps to maximize the water lily's exposure to sunlight and increases their efficiency during photosynthesis, which can succeed when the plant is very deep below the water surface. Moreover, flat leaves also help to reduce the water lily's resistance to the water current. These specific traits allow the water lily to survive in its environment.